My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
Good afternoon. We are doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business here with the News Driven Hour right after Ben Shapiro. And all this just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com. And your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks ending the day mixed to kick off the new week. Investors continuing to take in the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's big speech at that Jackson Hole Economic Symposium on Friday. Also, NVIDIA will be in the spotlight this week. Earnings news from NVIDIA coming out on Wednesday. We'll also be getting new readings on inflation on Friday. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 65 points. Good enough, you guessed it, for a record high close, settling at 41,241, let's call it. The S&P 500 slipping 18 to finish out at 5,617. And the NASDAQ moved lower by 152 points to close at 17,725. The news from the Fed on Friday continues to be digested. Today we heard from the San Francisco Fed President, Dr. Mary Daly. She says it's hard to imagine that anything could derail an interest rate cut at this point in September. In her words, I do see that adjusting policy is appropriate, Dr. Daly said in an interview on Bloomberg TV today. Last week, the Fed chairman indicated during his speech in Wyoming that the Fed would be paying close attention to the job market when determining its monetary policy. It looks like inflation is losing some of its spotlight now, turning now to the Labor Department, which has been showing signs of weakness. Investors will likely be scrutinizing any coming jobs reports in order to determine the scope of the Fed's indicated interest rate cuts. The Fed chairman's signal of imminent interest rate cuts last week has prompted investors to position for an easing cycle. The dollar has also moved lower in the face of all this. Powell said in his closely watched speech at Jackson Hole that the time has come for policy to adjust. In the Fed speak, that is taken as lower interest rates ahead. Nervous times in the Middle East with oil futures climbing more than 3% today. And looks like the global benchmark oil price is now at the highest we've seen in a couple of weeks. Crude oil futures moving higher after Israel and Hezbollah exchanged heavy gunfire in a major escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Elsewhere, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, 6 people have been killed in a most massive Russian air attack in Ukraine, according to Ukrainian authorities. Vice President Harris touting government price fixing in her economic policy plans, which many economists are harshly criticizing as ineffective in a market-driven economy, especially when it comes to prescription drugs. Critics argue a price-fixing scheme would stifle development of new drugs, treatments, and cures for diseases. I'll discuss that later this hour with Dean Clancy, Senior Policy Fellow with Americans for Prosperity. Crime continues to run rampant in the Los Angeles area. Among the latest headlines, a West Hollywood business owner now offering a reward to find the burglars who broken into his store for the third time. The owner of Bikes and Hikes L.A. on Santa Monica Boulevard offering $1,000, leading to the arrest and conviction of the thieves who broke into the store this past week. In the Valley, meanwhile, a store in Van Nuys, which sells self-defense devices, got burglarized for the second time in less than a week and for the third time within a year. It happened again overnight at Nake stores at a distributor of Byrna self-defense products on Van Nuys Boulevard. I'll discuss crime and what needs to be done at this point with the Honorable Steve Cooley, the former Los Angeles County District Attorney. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, today's record-shattering day for the Blue Chip Index and the whole works. Joining us live now, the one and only Dr. J, John Najarian. Dr. J, as he's known on the major financial networks, on X, formerly known as Twitter, at John Najarian, co-founder of Market Rebellion. He's got the laser eyes on, too, following the cryptos, and he's an author. Latest book with his brother Pete is It's Not an Option. Learning how to trade options is no longer an option. It is a necessity. John Najarian, good afternoon, sir.
Oh, it's great to hear all of that, Frank, and always wonderful to hear your voice and to participate with you on this show.
Likewise, John DeJarian, and thank you so much for taking the call today on a record-shattering day, no less, for the Dow Jones Industrial Average after a nervous start to the month of August. Now we're at a record high here for the Dow. Give us your reaction to the latest news here.
Well, the market continues to just do as you said, pay attention to the Fed chairman and the various Fed speakers from Jackson Hole. We're just 22 days out right now from the next Fed meeting. And that Fed meeting is, according to the CME tool, again, where they're estimating the likelihood of rate cuts of a certain magnitude, or rate increases if we were contra right now, but we're not. We're going to see rate cuts. It's a 68% chance that we're going to see a quarter of a point rate cut. And so obviously a very minority position would be 50 basis points. And as you and I have discussed, I think it might be a sell the news event if we're stacked as heavily as we are on the side of 25 basis points. I think it's likely that the market, when it gets that rate cut, responds positively, but then goes down quickly, not too far, but goes down fairly quickly because basically the news is not a surprise. A surprise would be that 50 basis point cut, and that would certainly be a catalyst, I think, for a much larger move in the market to the upside.
On the air live with John DeJarian. Of course, tech stocks have always been interest rate sensitive, and it appears cryptos too, right? Let's get to some of the exciting stuff here now. Pretty big rally over the weekend for the cryptos, with Bitcoin popping, above 64K, I believe. Right now, just above 63,000. What are your thoughts about what's been happening with the cryptos here?
Well, absent some of the other pressures that you've described, for instance, the Middle East pressures, as well as escalations in the Russia-Ukraine war, I think the idea that we're going to see lower interest rates in the next 22 days is going to be viewed as a positive for gold and for crypto, because, again, the competition for both of those, to some extent anyway, is a safe haven, and to the other extent it is, well, but they don't pay a dividend. So they tend to not do as well in a rising rate environment. But when you think rates are going down, they no longer have that much of a competition, if you will, for treasuries. As the treasuries come back down in yield, that's good for both gold, crypto, platinum, and silver.
On there live with John DeJarian. It should be noted gold still hovering at or near its record high right now at above 2,500 here, 25.52.30 at last check, down about $3. Some pretty wild predictions on where gold might be going. What's your thought on where gold, analog gold, not the digital gold, where regular gold is going at this point?
I think overall the likelihood that we see multiple record highs for gold is not out of the realm at all. I think, in fact, it's probably more likely than less likely. So I would think that we could see 26, 27, even 2,800 perhaps within the next 3 to 4 months. In other words, going into 2025, I wouldn't be surprised if we had a 2,700 handle for the yellow gold, yellow metal, that is. But I think the mines are going to be coming online to bring as much as they can to market at these prices without destroying the market itself, of course. But people that run those mines are pretty shrewd individuals when it comes to both hedging and when it comes to bringing enough to market after a big move to the upside. So I don't think we just go off to the races and we go to 3,000 or 3,500. I think that'll take years. But a nice steady progression for anybody that's owning gold or about to buy gold, I think is pretty much what the doctor ordered.
And we're on the air live with Dr. J, as he's known on the major financial networks, John DeJarian. And as far as where cryptos may be going here, specifically Bitcoin, we've seen some wild predictions certainly there. What is your level-headed, sober assessment on where Bitcoin might be going from here?
Well, I still think that we could see 85,000 by the end of the year. That might sound to some very, very bullish because, like you say, it's just over 63,000 right now. But I think it's possible. It really depends on how well President Trump does against Vice President Harris. If Mr. Trump regains office, he has been a staunch supporter of digital assets, whereas Ms. Harris has not. In fact, the only digital asset that she seemingly supports is the digital dollar, if you will, the CBDC, central bank digital currency. And most true crypto people don't like that at all. In fact, fear it because it's run by a central bank, if indeed such a product came to market in the U.S. And Gary Gensler is not a big fan of Bitcoin in particular. So I would think that if she were to remain in office this time as president instead of vice president, I think you'd see the cryptos soften rather than strengthen. And contra to that, if President Trump's in there, I think you're going to see, like I say, the likelihood of much higher prices for Bitcoin with it would be the first president that actively supports Bitcoin, which would be, I think, a significant driver.
Among the movers and shakers you talk to at business conferences and so forth, certainly a lot of people, business people here, are talking about the big contrast in tax policy between former President Trump and Vice President Harris, including the Harris camp's idea of taxing unrealized capital gains and discontinuing the Trump tax cuts, which, of course, President Trump would want to keep in place. So what buzz are you hearing on this important point affecting the economy?
Well, it seems that a lot of Democrats know that this is the third rail, much like the security nets like Social Security are the third rail, meaning that electrified rail that if you touch it, you die. I think no one wants to be the person that cuts Social Security benefits, and nobody really wants to be in here messing around with tax rates. But the Democrats, I would say, that I've spoken with, seem to say that's just a ploy. She's not really intending to do that. Move capital gains up to 44% from 20%, and or the unrealized gains, again, just based on the assets you have, including your home, being charged a 25% fee on that, if you will, a tax. I think it's more than just that for her. I really do think, this is not meant as a criticism, even though I'm a capitalist. It's not meant as a criticism to call her a Marxist, but she is, her father is, and I believe that she truly believes that taking from the rich and or evening the playing field is something that the president should do. I don't think that's the case at all. And I think that this policy that she's floated out there, these two, the capital gains and the unrealized gains tax, I think both of those are going to take significant amount of votes away from her. And you couple that with the idea that Kennedy has thrown his hat in, a lifelong Democrat, with President Trump. I think that's enough to put him over the top in a number of these swing states where Kennedy controlled between 5 and 6% of the vote, according to the most recent polls.
Thank you for raising all those important points. We're on the air live with John Najarian, and your new book, John Najarian, with your brother Pete, is "It's Not an Option. Learning How to Trade Options is no longer an option. It is a necessity." And a lot of option talk related to NVIDIA these days. NVIDIA with its earnings news coming out on Wednesday. The Magnificent One, which of course has been getting so much attention, led the AI rally in the market and pulling back about $3 today, back to $126 and change. What are you expecting on Wednesday when we get NVIDIA earnings? What do you see ahead for NVIDIA, and what about option plays here related to NVIDIA?
There's a fair amount of speculative paper, of course, as you would anticipate, that they're going to have a bullish report, meaning, of course, the stock goes higher. I'm not fading that. I'm waiting to see over the next 2 days because, as you said, these earnings come our way Wednesday, but not before the open, instead after the close. So Salesforce and several others will also have reports, but this will be the one that everybody's watching because they have outperformed so dramatically in the recent past with their announcements of demand, with their new orders and so forth. So I would think that it's going to be a strong enough report to send it back into the mid 130s and perhaps even test that 141 level that it hit before. But they can really, Frank, only deliver as much as they can make. And it's a wonderful problem. And for years and years, Boeing had, a $12 billion, $14 billion backlog of planes. Similarly, NVIDIA has a huge backlog, but you can only sell what you have. So that's great. It's on a forward-looking basis. It's a wonderful thing to have those orders. But unless those orders are written in blood, they tend to not be something that supports the stock if indeed it starts to weaken and all of a sudden other competitors come into that space and start gnawing away at the lead that they have.
Do you still like the Mag 7? There's been a lot of commentary lately to avoid them at this point. What are your thoughts about the Mag 7 names?
Well, you said at the top of the show, really, that the tech stocks tend to do very well in a shrinking rate environment. That's factually correct. And I think, when you're talking about the Mag 7, you're talking about some of the biggest capitalized stocks on earth. Now, Elon's stock has been part of that for a long time, but he's not tech the same way these other stocks like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Google, NVIDIA. He's not the same kind of tech. That's not to diminish the importance of what he does, but I think the other 6 stocks are much more tech, and he is more spread out in his tech. Eventually, he'll be bringing SpaceX, the Boring Company, and probably Starlink, which is right now under SpaceX. He'll be bringing all that and perhaps even a phone company to market as he spins these various projects that he's developed out. But right now, I'd say those 6 stocks benefit a lot from lower interest rates and continued demand from governments and the public. That's what we're about to see, I think.
All right. Before I let you off the hook here, John DeJarian, any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table, including in the crypto world as well?
Well, I'm continuing to support the idea that energy is going to be one of the most important things. So whether it's a uranium play like Energy Fuels, which is UUUU, 4 U's, or whether it's Camco, again, these are both uranium plays, CCJ. And then I like these micro nuclear reactors, these very small on-site ones like NNE, which is nano nuclear. I think all of those play really well in an environment where we need more power, we need it relatively quickly and cleanly as possible, and all 3 of those do that.
Fantastic, John. Always wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much for taking the call. Be sure to check out John DeJarian on X, formerly known as Twitter, at John DeJarian. John DeJarian, co-founder of Market Rebellion, and his new book is It's Not an Option. Learning How to Trade Options is No Longer an Option. It is a Necessity. Pete DeJarian, the co-author of that book. Say hi to Pete for us, too. John, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very, very much. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and let's get right out to the freeways now on 790 KBC. 790 KBC welcomes 98 Degrees coming to the Oxnard Performing Arts Center October 25th. Tickets are on sale now at AXS.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-795-2222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you are caller number 9. Call right now, 1-888-795-2222. Tickets furnished by The Canyon, where music meets the soul. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Mixed finish for the stock market, but the Dow in rally mode today, hitting a record high at the close, up 65 points, settling at 41,241. The S&P 500 pulled back 18, settled at 5,617, and the NASDAQ down 152 at 17,726. The yield on the 10-year note now 3.82%. The price of oil hovering above $77 a barrel in New York, above $80 in London as tensions rise in the Middle East. NVIDIA shares down $2.91 today at $126.46. NVIDIA earnings coming out on Wednesday after the closing bell, as we heard from Dr. J. John Najarian just a few moments ago. Apple up 34 cents at $227 and change. Tesla pulling into reverse today, down more than $7 at $213.21. Taking a look at the cryptos now, we see Bitcoin down about 300 at 63,020. Ethereum down a couple of bucks to 2,688, and Doge at 11 cents. Gold down nearly 3 today at $2,552.30 an ounce, and silver still hovering above $30, pulling back slightly today at $30.35 an ounce. And now the latest news for you here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Let's talk some more about NVIDIA, the magnificent one that, of course, everybody's talking about, leading the AI rally last year and into this year. The stock's valued about 37 times its forward earnings, compared with an average around 29 for the top 6 tech companies on the benchmark index that includes NVIDIA. NVIDIA will be reporting earnings on Wednesday. NVIDIA stock today did pull back nearly $3 at $126 and change. As Reuters notes, tech heavyweights, including Microsoft, which are spending heavily to build out their AI infrastructure, have been buying NVIDIA's powerful graphic processing units that allow big amounts of computing quickly. These chips are difficult to replace in present-day data centers, which have sharply boosted NVIDIA's fortunes, and looks like there could be an eye-popping number out on Wednesday. NVIDIA is expected to have recorded a year-over-year jump of about 112% in second quarter revenue to $28.6 billion, but its adjusted gross margin likely dropped more than 3 percentage points to just shy of 76% from the first quarter, burdened by the cost of a production ramp-up to meet growing demand. Reuters talked to Daniel Morgan, senior portfolio manager at Synovus Trust, said they're not only a benchmark for chips, they're also a benchmark for AI as a whole. He owns shares in big U.S. tech firms, including NVIDIA. If NVIDIA misses, investors are going to sell off every company in AI, he thinks. Some investors are concerned about the company's ability to meet lofty expectations and have questioned the pace of spending on AI by NVIDIA's largest customers. Those worries led to a 20% slump in NVIDIA stock through much of July and early this month, though a recent recovery has left the stock just about 5% below its record high, which we saw back in June. There might be more trouble brewing around potential production delays of NVIDIA's next-generation Blackwell AI chips. The CEO, Jensen Huang, said in May the chips would ship in the second quarter, but analysts have flagged design hurdles that could push the timeline. This means revenue growth might take a hit in the first half of next year. According to analysts at SemiAnalysis, margins could also get squeezed if NVIDIA's chip contractor TSMC raises fees, a possibility that the Taiwanese firm hinted at recently. NVIDIA is likely to forecast a 75% surge in third quarter revenue of $31.69 billion, according to analysts, ending its 5-quarter run of triple-digit growth and reflecting tough comparisons from a year ago when it surged about 206% to $18.12 billion. For the past 3 quarters, NVIDIA's growth has exceeded 200%. Tesla in the spotlight, too. That stock is still down about 11% so far this year, although it has gained about 2% over the past month. According to Yahoo Finance, a longtime Tesla shareholder struggling to maintain faith in Elon Musk's EV company, citing a range of issues. The Yahoo Finance article recently indicated that investor and vocal Tesla supporter Gerber recently cut his stake in Tesla from 420,000 shares to 266,000 shares now, valued around $50 million. Last year, he was a staunch supporter of the company, but has become skeptical recently. Gerber has invested heavily in Tesla during its challenging times in 2018 and 19, feels that Elon Musk's current focus on projects like humanoid robots, X, formerly known as Twitter, and SpaceX is diverting focus away from Tesla's core business. We see Tesla stock today down more than $7 at $213.21. Of course, Elon Musk way up there on the wealthiest in the world list. We see eye-popping wealth there. Let's bring up the latest here, if we could, please. Yeah, Elon Musk right now valued at $247.2 billion, number one on the real-time billionaires list, according to Forbes magazine. Jeff Bezos, our neighbor in Beverly Hills, right now at $195.6 billion. Bernard Arnault and family is the guy that owns Louis Vuitton. Moet Hennessy, building a house in West Hollywood, by the way. He's at $192.5 billion. And Mark Zuckerberg, still doing great, head of Meta, formerly known as Facebook, at $182.8 billion, the top 4 wealthiest people in the world. SpaceX is going to have a busy night tonight. They're set to launch a mission that will not only see humans travel the farthest away from Earth since Apollo 17 in 1972, but also conduct the first ever commercial spacewalk. This in addition to nearly 40 different science experiments and an attempt to transmit data from space through the Starlink network. The Polaris Dawn mission, consisting of 4 private citizen crew members, scheduled liftoff on a 5-day mission early tomorrow morning out of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 3:38 a.m. local time there. So that puts it just after midnight here on the West Coast. There are 2 additional launch opportunities within the 4-hour window at 5:23 a.m. Eastern and 7:09 a.m. Eastern time at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The crew consisting of Mission Commander Jarek Isaacman, pilot Scott Poteet, Mission Specialist Sarah Gillis, and Anna Menon, a mission specialist and medical officer, will fly aboard a Falcon 9 and a Crew Dragon capsule. Isaacman will be making his second flight into space, previously commanding and funding the Inspiration 4 mission in September of 2021, which also flew on a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule. He is the CEO of Shift 4, which works in payment processing solutions. Exciting morning ahead, early morning ahead at the Kennedy Space Center. Obviously a night launch in the middle of the night. They'll be soaring away into an ocean of night. I, of course, covered many of the space shuttle launches back in the day, and there's nothing more exciting than a launch day at the Kennedy Space Center, so I'm excited for all the folks there that'll be gathered there early tomorrow morning. Looks like the commander also enjoys aviation, clocking more than 7,000 hours in different aircraft, including ex-military vehicles. He also co-founded what could become the world's largest private air force, Draken International, to train pilots for the U.S. Armed Forces. Isaacman also holds several world records, including 2 speed-around-the-world flights in 2008 and 2009 that raised money and awareness for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Scott Poteet, call sign Kid, served 20 years in the U.S. Air Force, including commanding a squadron as well as flying with the Thunderbirds. In total, Poteet has more than 3,200 hours of flying to his name. According to NASA Spaceflight.com, in addition to serving in various roles, including Director of Business Development at Draken International and Vice President of Strategy at Shift 4, he served as Mission Director of Inspiration 4, and he's also an accomplished triathlete, competing 15 Ironman triathlons since 2000, including 4 world championships. Talk about an overachiever here. And Sarah Gillis, call sign Cooper, is a lead space operations engineer at SpaceX and a mission specialist for this flight. SpaceX, of course, headquartered here in Southern California in Hawthorne. She's no stranger to the astronaut training process as she developed the mission-specific curriculum and training for Crew Dragon astronauts. That includes preparing the Demo 2 astronauts in 2020, which saw the return of human spaceflight from U.S. soil for the first time since the retirement of the space shuttle back in 2011. Gillis also directly trained the Inspiration 4 crew ahead of their flight. She's also spent time in mission control, including acting as navigation officer for Dragon cargo resupply vehicles to the International Space Station, as well as the crew operations and resources engineer for crewed flights, acting as the relay between ground controllers and the crew in space. A very important job that is. Originally from Boulder, Colorado, Sarah is an avid hiker, climber, and adventurer who first studied classical violin before switching her interest to aerospace and becoming an astronaut. And Anna Walker Menon is a lead space operations engineer at SpaceX, where she manages the development of crew operations. Not only has she acted as a core for other crew missions, but also helped create the role, the SpaceX equivalent of NASA's capsule communicator Capcom position. Menon served in mission control during multiple Dragon missions. Before joining SpaceX, she worked at NASA as a biomedical flight controller for the International Space Station, supporting space station crews from the ground as they completed different health-based experiments. She led the planning and execution of all biomedical operations for the Expedition 47 and 48 missions. She's volunteered with Engineers Without Borders and Engineering World Health, and her dream of flying to space began in 4th grade when her teacher, the daughter of a Space Shuttle Challenger pilot Michael Smith, her name is Allison Smith Balch, took her on a field trip at NASA. She also enjoys hiking, flying small planes, and salsa dancing. Now, if all goes as planned, the crew will spend 5 days aboard the Resilience. The vehicle first flew the Crew 1 mission in 2020. It was then used again for the Inspiration 4 mission in September of 21, which was also commanded by Isaacman. The mission included the 4-person crew performing experiments and viewing the Earth through a specially created module. So a lot of action at the Kennedy Space Center in preparation for an exciting liftoff early tomorrow morning. Again, it'll be just after midnight our time and just after 3 in the morning at the Kennedy Space Center. SpaceX ready to launch the historic Polaris Dawn mission. Back here on Earth, let's get the latest on your ride now here on 790 KABC. The KABC, it's the economy, stupid and not so stupid, right? The economy, front and center of the presidential election coming up here. Vice President Harris touting government price fixing in her economic policy plans, which many economists are harshly criticizing as ineffective in a market-driven economy, especially when it comes to prescription drugs. Critics argue a price-fixing scheme would stifle development of new drugs, treatments, and cures for diseases. Joining us live now is Dean Clancy, Senior Policy Fellow with Americans for Prosperity. Dean, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Oh, it's a pleasure and an honor.
Likewise, thank you very much for joining us here to our Southern California audience. And give us your impression here based on what we've heard so far from Vice President Harris on her economic policies, especially on this price-fixing idea.
Well, the Biden-Harris administration and now candidate Harris have really put a lot of emphasis on imposing government price controls to try to hold down prices. This is ironic because it was their policies that have caused the skyrocketing cost of living we've experienced over the last 3 years. And they don't seem to understand the lessons of history, which is government price controls never work. We have 4,000 years of recorded history, and it always turns out the same way. Scarcity, shortages, black markets, and eventually higher prices when you lift the price controls. Yet that's exactly what they decided to do with prescription drugs. They imposed price controls in a bill that passed in 2022. Kamala Harris cast the deciding vote in the United States Senate to make that happen. And the other day they celebrated and said, look, we negotiated with the drug companies, brought down the price of 10 popular drugs. Aren't we great? Well, when you look closely at the numbers, you realize they didn't actually bring the prices down very much, but they now have given themselves a very, very powerful price control tool that they can use to cudgel the drug companies. And the evidence is already in. We have seen many drug companies cutting back on research and development because they can no longer be sure that they're going to be able to recoup the costs of developing new life-saving cures. Developing new drugs is a risky enterprise, costs a lot of money, a lot of time. They have to be able to expect to get some return on it, or they're going to shut down the research and development. And we've seen about 24 promising drug development projects shut down since the price controls were enacted, precisely because now we've got this uncertainty. And it's really a bad policy. Economists all agree that this is the effect. They only disagree about how intensely negative the effect is. It's bad for patients, it's bad for consumers, and we really need a more enlightened policy.
On the air live with Dean Clancy, Senior Policy Fellow with Americans for Prosperity. Looks like they tried price fixing in ancient Rome, and we saw how it ended there, right?
Well, yes, the Emperor Diocletian. In fact, it led to his abdication and a weakening of the Roman Empire. In fact, Hammurabi all the way up through Richard Nixon, they've all tried it, and it's always had the same negative results.
Anyone who lived during the time we had East and West Berlin, it was always fascinating going across Checkpoint Charlie there to from the prosperous West Berlin to the dismal East Berlin sector, where, of course, they had shortages, and it was an absolutely dreary existence there on the other side of the Berlin Wall. It's hard to believe, we might be returning to those kind of policies.
Well, I think that if Vice President Harris, if she's elected and goes through with her plan to impose price controls on groceries, when she's accused the grocery companies and food manufacturers of price gouging, then I think you're going to see empty store shelves. And just like you saw in East Berlin, when you set the price too low, then what happens is the sellers simply stop selling, and you go to black markets and ultimately higher prices. It disrupts the whole economy. Really bad idea. And I think she's trying to say to the world, look, I feel your pain. I care about the high cost of living. But it is ironic, since she herself literally is the cause of the high cost of living.
And then this idea of taxing unrealized capital gains, any thoughts on that one?
Well, that's one of the most shocking ideas that Harris has put out, because you're talking about imposing a tax on stocks, bonds, and other investments that you haven't sold, so you haven't actually gained anything. It's just gains on paper. To impose a tax on that is it's bizarre, to put it one way, but there's something kind of I don't even know what adjective to put on it. It's certainly disturbing, and it's going to make it hard for investors. I mean, if you can't be sure that you won't pay a tax until you actually realize a gain, are you going to invest or going to take as many risks? I think it could have serious negative economic consequences.
Thank you very much for highlighting these important points as we head to Election Day. Dean Clancy, Senior Policy Fellow with Americans for Prosperity. Look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Thank you very, very much. And stay tuned now for the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang. And I'll be back with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here. Mottek On Money on 790 KABC.
When you have sports mixed with your pop culture, along with humor and celebrity interviews, your earbuds are enjoying The Rich Eisen Show.
Good to see you, Bruce Feldman, the Big 12 landscape. I just know how Dion is, where he's coming from. His wins are measured differently. The question is, as you said, it's got to go from 4 to 8.
I think they can do that. It would be hard not to get better considering how bad they were on the offensive line last year. Now, their schedule actually feels harder this year than it was last year.
Search for The Rich Eisen Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.